Hey, welcome to the first Grow Global Monday Mastermind in 2025. That's fantastic. It's going to be a great year. We're looking forward to it. I hope everybody had a great new year, did something fun, did something unique, especially coming off of last year. What did NAR say? It was the worst sales year in 30
Ever.
years. Is that what they said?
Yes. The
Well,
worst birthday year for everyone.
most of our people didn't feel it. They were doing great, and hopefully, this our Monday Masterminds was helping agents to grow and expand their business in different, unique ways. So, guys, we got a great event today. But if you're new to our Grow Global Monday Masterminds, we have our website whygrowglobal.com that you can go to. You can see some of the past Money Masterminds we've done. Watch the recordings. There's some great ones in there. But today we've got a special one. We're starting off the year with a bang. And this one we're talking about effective negotiations with sellers. A lot of times people will be trying to figure out how can I get the edge when I'm dealing with buyers and sellers. And today we're talking about effective negotiations with sellers. And we've got the famous Stephanie Gilezan from Kentucky, who is snowed in with all the snow going on. And we have our rock star Alex Montagano up in Indiana, who's also has a ton of snow in that area. So they're ready to give it all to you. So, guys, I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
Awesome, awesome. Well, welcome everybody. I love it that we're starting off a new year. And, last year, real estate had a lot of different things happening. Not only, like Rob said, did NAR say that it was the worst real estate year in 30 years, which I find it hard to believe because everyone I talked to had a pretty decent year. So
Right?
that means this year's going to be amazing. But we also dealt with a change. You all in residential real estate dealt with something you have never dealt with, and that is how do you explain your value to your buyers, right? You had always been going and showing property, knowing that a cooperating commission was being offered. And you never had to worry about saying that and getting your buyers to sign off on something. Well, everything changed in August. And one of the things that we heard a lot about, and this is why we wanted to start off this year with seller effective negotiation, because now sellers have gotten wind of that. And they're saying, well, I don't want to pay or offer a buyer side at all. We don't want to pay on that. And so, what are top agents across the country doing? How are we posing that to our sellers? How are we keeping that conversation going? And what are we doing to be effective when it comes to seller negotiation? But also when it comes to just anything. Look, today is your day. Today is the day that you put questions in this chat, that you make sure that anything that you've come up against, whether it's been this year, the prior year, whatever year, or something that you're dealing with, put it in the chat. Take advantage of my experience of 26 years, Alex's experience of 26 or 20 some odd years almost, Laura, Rob, Kim, all of us, because we are here to give to you everything it is that we come up against every single day. And by goodness, I'm telling you, we've been there, we've done it, and we've overcome it. So, Alex, let's open it up for you, sir.
Yeah, I think this is a great opportunity. And, when everyone, I think it's important to recognize one of the small things is that real estate always is a hyper local conversation. So what I deal with in our market versus what Kim and Rob may deal with in Atlanta are totally different things. And I hosted a mastermind at the end of December, about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And we had about 20 to 25 people in the room. And when I asked the question of who had the best year in real estate that they've ever had, I think we walked away with 65% of the room acknowledged that they had. So when you take a look at what NAR says about the real estate transactions being the lowest they've been since 1995, you take the changes to the NAR that went into effect in Indianapolis in our market in July, and you look at those things, that's substantial in terms of a building block with people moving forward with their career. So one of the things, Stephanie, you talking about how we've experienced so much change, and what conversations are you having with buyers and sellers, and how are you preparing sellers? I think when we look at how last year shook out, our team did 253 transactions, and our average BAC on that was 2.79% over those 253 transactions. And this is something that I've tracked since I got in the business. But I think what's fascinating is, as we sit here, we have 27 properties under contract already for 2025 with an average BAC of 2.93%. And when we sat there at this point last year, we did not have that. I've never been a part of that many transactions at this juncture in the year. And look, some of that's business that's pushed from the end of last year, but our team sold 7 houses this past weekend alone. And so I think a big part of this is understanding, one, how are you acquiring listings? How are you navigating acquiring those? And then when you have them, how are you getting them under contract? And of the 27 deals that we have under contract, a handful of those have been deals that were a lot harder to get across the finish line than they've ever been. And there's some skill associated with that, and there's hard conversations that you need to have. And I think a big part of the conversation today will come to that, and we can dive into that as we go. So I'll turn it back over to Rob. Some data there for me, but yeah, look, we're going to blow away that 253 sale number from a year ago, and that's up 35% from our 2023 number. So take the lowest real estate market since 1995 on a national scale, and we beat our numbers by 35%. Pretty nuts, to say the least.
Yeah, I'm seeing that as a trend with especially the people in our group. I'm hearing that their numbers came in really good for last year. So for have the industry down, but our agents stayed steady or increased dramatically, I'm really pleased with that. So Stephanie, kick us off on what would you do for effective negotiations with sellers? What's the hot topic on that?
Well, I think, you got to start with the beginning. And I think maybe that's how we run this mastermind today, is we start with the very beginning, and that's obtaining that listing. And, let's go with that hard topic of conversation and how you're setting price. And one of the things I want everybody to remember is that when you're talking, and we're going to talk houses today, a lot of you all know I'm on the commercial side of things and land and so forth, but we'll talk houses today. And so when you're setting the price, remind your property owner, remind your seller that market analysis took into consideration that those prices dealt with commissions, right? Those were brought into the mix, okay? And you need to point and address that out, and you need to bring it right up front. And so that's something that, don't wait for the seller to bring that up. One of the things that I have won is, and every single time when it comes to negotiation, everything that feels difficult for you to have, every little thing that you walk into an appointment that you might be fearful of, bring it out on the table first. You control the conversation. So the thing that I hate the most is having to talk about, oh gosh, they're going to bring up compensation. Well, we're going to get it out of the way. And we're going to talk about, here is what I charge. And now we're going to get into why. Okay. That's how I start every single conversation. And I think that's why when I'm done with those conversations, there's no questions, okay? Now, do I win with No, there's some difficult people out there, okay? There are some sellers that have gotten win. They don't want to worry about ever contributing to a buy side. And there are times that we have to leave that one sit, and we have to say, well, you know what? We're going to look at everything, because when it comes time, I'm going to get you an offer in writing. That's what I'm going to do. My job is to get you an offer in writing. And so if you can't win on getting them to commit to offering up a cooperating compensation to a buy side, then get them to commit that your job is to get them all offers in writing regardless. And just set the precedent and set the tone that way. Alex?
Yeah, so I made a bunch of notes before this, and I think starting at the beginning is the most important thing that you could be doing, right? And I think understanding the negotiation that you're going to have with the seller goes back to the conversation that you have with them to understand what their goals are. And I think, look, I think it's really fair. The listings that I'm going to be approached with will be very different from a brand new agent and what they're experiencing. And so it's a lot easier for me to walk in a room and take control of a lot of situations because of a narrative that I have and the stories I get to tell and the history I have that supports my experience. But for those of you that don't have this large track record of success, or you're trying to use success and stories from your Grow Global calls or whatever network of agents that you work with, I think there's some things to recognize here. And when you go to the look, this always comes down to net seller value, right? Like how much money is a seller walking away with? And we've moved away from sales price being such a driven thing because of what the market is, and now working towards net seller value because of how the compensation is handled and what those conversations are. And so I have a note here. I think this really goes back to the goals of the seller. And the seller has a couple goals here, right? It's what kind of motivation do they have? What is the motivation? How bad do they want to sell? Who's affiliated with the transaction, and what does that process look like for a seller? Is it an estate with 5 people involved and 3 of the sellers are pains in the butt that you can never get a hold of because they don't care? Or is it a family that needs to move? And understanding seller motivation from need to move versus want to move is a very important thing. I think when you think of things of a seller needing to move, it's death, disease, divorce to downsize, or it's things about like growing families, it's lifestyle changes, it's job promotions, it's space shortages, it's this house doesn't work for us, it's job transfers. Things like that are reasons that people need to move. And so when you're understanding those things and you look at the motivation of the seller, I've got 4 notes here about how and what you should be doing and how you should be taking listings and what your approach to them should be. So you've got 4 different approaches here. One is a high price with a high motivation listing, okay? And that's when a seller, no matter what you do and what your conversation looks like, they want to take something that feels like it's quote unquote overpriced relative to what market standard is. And that you could show them everything. You could dig into the comps, you could sit with them. They don't care, it's what they want to do. But if their motivation is high, you can pave the trail for them on what that process looks like of price reductions. You can write them into listing contracts. You can set that expectation and you can work that process together, because ultimately, if your motivation is high, it will trump that need for a high price if the market doesn't warrant that price that the seller is requesting. Number 2 is a high motivation and low price. Jump all over those listings. Those are the best ones. They're the easiest ones, and they give you the most control to help them price their property to warrant multiple offers and the highest level of interest. Those are ultimately what we're going to drive for all the time as skilled realtors. Low price and low motivation, those are people that are kind of apathetic to a situation. You may have a spouse that's not on board with another spouse that's about to sell. And while you say, who would list their property at a low price and have low motivation to sell? I told a story this morning about a family member of mine who actually didn't really want to sell his house. He put it on the market at fair market value and he had 2 offers at it and called me and goes, what the hell should I do? I don't think I want to sell. To which I said, take your house off the market, please. And look, those conversations, but it's worth it. You could do open houses. You could get listing calls. You could get sign calls. You could see the process through, and you never know. You could field the phone call that helps get your client over the hump to actually want to sell the property. And then the last one is high price and low motivation. And those are the tough ones that I think I would encourage the realtors that are newer to the business or somebody that's struggling, looking for opportunity, to be very leery about taking. Those will give you a whole hell of a lot of heartburn as a realtor when you've got an overpriced listing with somebody that doesn't really care what happens. And what I tell agents on our team, and I say this to myself, I would tell all of you, you can't care more than your client cares when it comes to selling a property. So if you've got a house that's overpriced and you've got a seller that doesn't care, well, that's not a great recipe for success. So maybe you take that listing, but you increase your communication with them. You have it once a week, you keep them up to date, but you're not stressing and having a ton of heartburn on it. But if they start asking you, what are you doing to sell my house? I think there's a reality that you need to get here with your client of, hey, look, like I can't care about this more than you. And so that's where I would say you start. And then there's a whole path that you go down after that. So I'll turn it back over to Stephanie so we can kind of yin and yang this, and I'll dive into more of my stuff after that.
Now, I love that you said that, Alex. Never take a high-priced listing. And don't. Look, I've had agents say, but if I take a high-priced listing, at least I have a listing. Guys, it's not even worth it, because what you do is you get a reputation, right? How do Alex and I know this? Because we've been there and done that, right? I mean, that's the truth. I'm going to tell on myself, okay? We've been there and we've done that. We've churned our wheels. We've gotten frustrated. We've had other people tell us that we were ignorant for doing so. And, you know, we don't look good to the buyer either, or the potential buyers that are out there, because putting it out to the market makes us look like we believe that it's worth that, right? And so you don't want to set yourself up for the failure. It is so much better to be able to say to that seller, look, sir or gal, you know, your property is not worth it, and walk away from it. There might be an agent that takes it, but guess what? They are not going to sell it, and you might get it when it expires, right? They'll come back to you. That happens so much when that first person fails, that they come back to the tough person, right? Look, I don't know how often I get deals on the listing side because I am a tough negotiator. It's not because I walk into these listings and I fluff and I puff and I kiss their butts. It's not at all. It is not about if I think something's beautiful or, oh, they've done a great job. It has nothing to do with any of that. It's statistical, it's data, and it's what is it worth? I mean, it's very, very simple. Alex talked a little bit, and look, Alex is right, okay? There's everybody's got their different mechanisms, okay? For me, someone wants to sell, they want to sell. For me, the motivation across the board is all the same. And the reason why that is because that's how I handle it on the buy side too. So I don't put anything of emotion on the sell side, the seller side of it either, because when I'm going to negotiate on that buy side, I've got to hold true to that too. So again, you know, there is different motivations, but in my book, if somebody's calling me to list their property, they want to sell it. And if I sit at their table with them and they're talking themselves out of the sell, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to shake their hand and thank them for the time and gladly walk out their door. Because if they're not serious about selling, I'm not serious about listing, and I'm gone. I don't have that kind of time, right? I am as professional and as business comes. My clients are not my friends, and that's okay with me.
Well, I think a big part of that is because that is a brand and reputation that you've built, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I would say too is, you know, Kim commented in the, you know, never take a high price, low motivation listing. And I think a big part of this, especially for a lot of agents out there, is asking correct questions in your listing appointment. So understanding, why are you there? So why did you call me? Why have you reached out to me about selling your home? And look, oftentimes we're going to think about this from a standpoint of somebody that we have a relationship with. So a friend, a family member, a referral from somebody else. But if it's a stranger, you've got to ask the questions to provide yourself with enough information to be as effective as possible. And if you don't ask those questions, you're not going to be able to answer the reason that you're actually in the door. And so we oftentimes think that it's you walk in, you provide a price and a service, and you leave. But the reality is understanding every seller is different from a standpoint of how you communicate with them. So how you're communicating with an engineer and an accountant is going to be different than how you communicate with somebody that wants to feel warm and fuzzy, and maybe it's your grandma who wants to feel like, oh man, I love that guy that walked in the door and he actually listened to me. That's who I want to hire. And understanding those things can help you understand what you're communicating with them. And one of the things I learned from somebody when I was early on in the business was when you walk into a property, if somebody says, "Hey, would you like to sit down and get into the brass tacks here?" As soon as you walk in the door, that tells you that somebody's fact driven. They want to be hit between the eyes with the truth. They want to see the data and they want to talk all about it. If somebody says, "Hey, can I show you the house?" They want to show off the house to you. So as you're walking through the property with them, you should be asking questions. Oh, wow, this closet is incredible. Who designed it? Who did this kitchen? Who did your primary bathroom? Though oftentimes they're taking you to those places and showing you that stuff so they can show off the work that they've done for you. And so they're doing that because they want to be made to feel important and a part of the process. And those things are really important when it comes to the idea of relationship building. It's going to make them feel more comfortable with you because ultimately you have to earn the right. And just because they've called you, oftentimes does not mean that you have the right to hit them with between the eyes with the truth. And sometimes this process takes a little longer for every client. And point in case would be, we listed a property, I think put it on the market in November. Guy's a vendor partner of ours. He's become a friend of mine. And around Christmas time, we got an offer on his house. Got an offer for $280,000 on a $300,000 listing. He said, "Alex, I'm not going to negotiate." And I said, "I'm going to tell you when it's time, when you're making a large, substantial mistake. You are doing that now. Alex, we're not in a position to do it. I respect you. I'm listening to you, but I'd like to counter at list price. Can you please draft a counter at list price for us? Can you help me?" And this is our dialogue. "Can you help me get there? What are we doing?" "Alex, I want to net this. I got to do this. I'm using the money for this." I'm like, "I just want you to know that the market does not care what you're doing with your proceeds. They do not owe you any proceeds. And this is our first offer in 45 days. Respectfully, can you put together a counter?" "You got it, brother." A week later, we get another offer, 280 on a 300. I said, "Do not make the same mistake twice. This is your buyer. Sell your property now. Do not sell it for this. We'll negotiate, but here's what we would do. You're right. Let's do it." But what I knew based on the dialogues and the conversation that we had had over time, high motivation, high price. And so just constantly chipping away at that relationship. And look, I've worked on a lot of things to have that privilege and earned that right to say, do not do this twice. You've already done it once. And if you don't earn that and you don't have that relationship and you haven't built that rapport, a seller will simply just tell you, "Oh, you're just doing this for yourself," or "You're just doing." So I've had to work to earn that privilege to be able to make that comment and position us that way. And look, we sold at a number that we would have sold to somebody else a couple weeks before, but we got a better buyer. So it worked out in our favor. But you've had to earn those things by building those relationships with the seller who's ultimately hired you to sell their home.
Well, and he's lucky he got that second off because a lot of times the first one is always the best, right? I mean, I say that all the time. Look, your first offer is typically your best. So he's lucky he got that second chance. One of my favorite things that I've done for years is, when you have, what was that, Alex? You all were 20,000 apart, list price to what it was selling
Yeah,
for, correct?
right.
And so, when you're listing something and it is that different, which isn't drastic, I would do that. I mean, that's not, obviously there's room for negotiation, but I would take whatever I'm leaving for them, whether it's the market analysis or the property valuation, whatever it is that I'm leaving for that seller, and I would put in red ink what I felt that price was going to be, and I'd circle it and I'd date it. And a lot of times when those offers would come in and I knew, oh my God, this is it, because it had been 45 days or 60 days or whatever the case might be, just like Alex's gut was telling him, I'd say, pull that out and relook at that, because over time, when you've been in the business long enough and you get to know your market, we're not psychics, but we do get to feel what's going to end up occurring, especially when something's sitting on the market for quite some time. No, that's
And
great.
The other thing that I always, and I don't know where this came from, but I've actually used this on my own parents in a negotiation. And look, I helped my parents sell their house. I think it was 2015, 2016. My dad wanted to bust the buyer over, 2,500 bucks. And, you know, I refer to, it's called the emotional value of done. I don't know where it came from. I don't know how I thought of it, but what's it worth to you to not have this conversation anymore? What's it worth not to drag someone through your house? What's it worth it for you and your spouse not to talk about every single time there's a showing, texting me going, "Hey Alex, what do we do? What they say? What's the feedback?" And so there's an emotional value tied to this as well. And a big part of that is understanding putting your seller where they're going. And in that instance, my parents were downsizing. And I was like, guys, you're moving in the condo. You've already found the condo. Are you going to care about $2,500 in 5 years from now? Are you going to care about it in 12 months from now? If you do, you're welcome to call me and I'll give you the 2,500 bucks because I'm not going to be willing to talk about it, but you need to sign this deal right now. And oftentimes when you're working with a seller, when you understand, it's those questions early on to understand what the motivation is. Where are you going and what are you doing? So let's say you have somebody that's relocating. They're moving it snows today and they're like, Alex, I'm done. My friend Rob Campbell said we never have any snow. I'm moving to Atlanta. And we put the house on the market and it's stuck and we're overpriced. And all of a sudden, boom, an offer comes in. You should be putting your seller in the warm weather of Atlanta while you're having that conversation. Because psychologically, they're going there. So put them there. So the conversation would be something like this. Hey, look, you guys aren't here. You're down looking at property in Atlanta. Your home is going to sit through the Indiana winter. You got to worry about winterizing it. You got to pay for utilities. You got a mortgage payment due in however many days.
You're going to slip and fall and break a hip.
I'm going to slip and fall and break a hip because I'm shoveling your driveway for you when the showings happen. And then I got to go over there all the time. Guys, like, let's just get this buttoned up. Is it really worth whatever the delta of price is between where they're stubborn and what the reality of the market is? And you've already suggested all of this data to them, but you're putting them in the seat of where they want to go. So you're subtly nudging them down there to go, you know what? Like, you're right. Like, we need to get to Atlanta and we can't get to Atlanta unless we sell this house first. Or we can't effectively buy a property in Atlanta while carrying this because the market is XYZ in Atlanta. So you're having those conversations to subtly put them there, and it's making them feel comfortable to go, you know what? Like, and I always make this conversation, and it's kind of a subtle joke. Hey, the perfect negotiation, nobody's happy at the end. You got a mad buyer, mad seller, and a couple agents that got railroaded by their clients. So I think we're there. Let's get this done. And look, everyone laughs at stuff like that. Like, if you got an engineer and an accountant, I'm not going to make that joke. But if I've got a relationship and I built that rapport, they're going to go, yeah, I know it sure feels that way, right? Like, you really think we should do this? Yeah, and here's why. A, B, C, D, E. Here's all the reasons. You put the seller in that seat, you're going to get a lot more of what you want a lot easier that way.
Absolutely. One of the things too, when you're having these conversations with these sellers, and Alex, this is more of a question for you, just due to the fact that I think a lot of the audience might be thinking of this, but, going back to setting those goals on, with even the 2,500 or this or that with the home inspection or with the repairs or the credits or whatever, how are you handling, those negotiations?
Yeah, so I think, look, a lot of this is, did you help them buy the house? I think is a really great question. Because look, if you did and you knew,
Yeah.
then you still knew when they're selling this time around. If you helped them buy and you didn't know, then you got some fixing to do as an agent because you let your client down when they bought the property. And look, that happens. A handful of years ago, we repped a client. They bought a house in great part of town. They had a bunch of work done by a contractor that I recommended that I no longer work with. We put the house in the market. 4 years later, sold it, and boom, here comes a $22,000 foundational issue that actually never got repaired after they moved in. And look, a big part of that fell to me because I didn't do the due diligence up front and I didn't put them in a position for success. I ponied up a pretty substantial amount of my commission to make that right because in my heart, I felt that that was the right thing to do for the client because of the work I didn't do when they bought the house. Those things happen. They just do. I've heard stories of people buying property with that smelled like smoke, and you say, hey, if you just do A, B, C, and D, the smoke goes away. It didn't go away. And all of a sudden you're looking at having a whole house repainted and all these other things going because you didn't do the right work up front. And I've heard stories of agents writing those checks. And look, that's part of the job and part of the relationship that you have with the client. The other side of this is if you didn't help them. Hey, look, we weren't there when you bought this, so I don't know.
Yeah,
What I do know is if you have to fix this for this client, you're going to fix it for anybody else. And
that's right.
those are hard conversations to have, but I'll tell everyone this, that is what you're paid for. The inspection negotiation is when you earn your money. It is the nitty gritty, it's the hard work, but that is where your value comes into play. So I would tell you that there's a couple things associated with that. What does your Rolodex of vendor partners look like? So when the inspection comes across your desk, are you just going, hey, Mr. Seller, Mrs. Seller, oh man, this looks like a lot of stuff. What do you want to do? Well, that's not how we do things. How we do things is, hey, look, it's a pretty extensive list. Here's how we handle this. We associate each line item with a contractor. We work on getting quotes associated with them. So we can actually, instead of negotiating based on feelings, we negotiate based on facts. How much are these? What actually is wrong? An inspector may call it out, but a professional may say, hey, look, this is just recommended that you get this looked at. Understanding how to read an inspection report and navigate through those things is a skill that you all need to have. You're paid to have it. You're required to have it. Have it. And then what are those contractors doing for you? So they going out there and saying, hey, look, this is what the report flags. This is what my evaluation says, and this is the cost of the recommendation of the repair. Then you can negotiate based on those facts. And one of the lines I heard at the end of last year is don't bring your feelings to a fact fight. So those are the conversations that I would have with your seller. Hey, Mr. Seller, I know this feels like a lot. I'm sure you're upset by this, or this is more than you were expecting. And I can understand why you don't like that. But I wasn't here when you bought the house, or I was here when you bought the house. Here's what the contractor list says. Let's negotiate on that accordingly. And I can work behind the scenes with the agent on the other end of the transaction. And ultimately, you're going to have a decision to make. Do you want to sell your house or not? And what items on this list are required to close? So is it going to be on this buyer or any other buyer? Or what other agents or what other buyer do you think we can skate by without taking care of these handful of items? And at the end of the day, if you want to walk away from a deal over a couple $1,000s, you're going to have a decision to make and handle it accordingly.
Yeah, no, and I'm so glad that you brought that up because here's the thing, you all think about this exactly what Alex said, okay? If you represented that transaction, that's a hard conversation to have when you're reselling that property and something has come up that was existing prior to. So think about this for a second, okay? Your true value, and this is part of your listing presentation, okay? This is part of your initial interview, hear me? Interview with the seller. Because you're on an interview when you go and meet that seller. You are interviewing for that position. And one of the lines that I have always said is that, look, majority of real estate professionals are going to be able to get your property under contract. Majority. They're going to. It's from contract to close is where all things tend to fall apart. And here's why. The inspection. You might think that everything is just dandy with your property, but you'll be surprised at all the things that gets uncovered during an inspection. That's where you need a professional like me who understands how to get warranted work completed so that when we sell this property, you're not getting sued after the fact. Or we don't have a buyer run like hell away from this transaction. Number two, it's value. I know I'm going to get you top dollar for this property, but here's the deal. Not only do I have to prove it to the public, but I must prove it to the appraiser. And that's a hard part in itself. And it takes a specialist to be able to prove it to the appraiser. And so that's who I am. And that's what I do. And that's why I charge what I charge. Any questions? And so those are the things that matter when you're on that interview. Now, when you are actually negotiating those things, you've got to look, and we're going to talk about this on next week's mastermind when we're talking from the buy side with home inspection, and different repair requests and so forth. But you look at that list and you go ahead and you set your seller up for knowing this. You tell them the things that we're going to have to say yes to are the things that buyer cannot put this house right back on the market and sell it because it's going to get dinged again. Those are the things we're going to focus on. And if you know, if I wasn't part of that transaction ahead of time, if you know of things, go ahead and get an inspection now and go ahead and let's get it taken care of. Let's get everything out of the way. Or just know what you've got to say yes to. I'm putting this property on the market. True story. One of my long time clients bought one ticket to win a property, $1.2 million property, 1,250,000 to be exact. She won.
How
She
much was
calls
the
me up
ticket?
on December 12th and said, Stephanie, you won't believe this. I won the Norton Hospital house in Norton Commons. I go, what? Actually, I didn't say what. I said something else, but I can't say that on this call because you'd have to beat me, okay? I'm like, you lucky beep. So anyway, I'm going to put it on the market, all right? It's a new construction. I go over there and I'm looking at everything and I'm like, look, nobody's done the walkthrough on this property with the builder. We're not putting this on the market because my eye is seeing all kinds of things that are simple. They're simple. But if I'm seeing it, the next person's going to see it. And I don't want to deal with it. I don't want an inspection repair request that is 5 pages long. I don't want to screw with it, guys. So let's get this builder in here. Let's do the walkthrough. Let's blue tape this thing and let's get it all knocked out. And then let's put the thing on the market. Because I want an easy job. And you know why I want an easy job? Because you won this house. You want to maximize your winnings because you're going to pay a bunch of taxes, 20%, you all, 20% on something like that is a lot. So, we want to make sure that when we get to that closing table, that we're actually going to close on this property. And so that's one of the things that we're able, that I'm doing ahead of time because I don't want to deal with it. I don't want there to be a fight. Everybody knows she won this house. Everybody's going to assume, hey, it's a free house. Everybody's already going to come into the transaction. Okay. It appraised for $1,250,000. We appraised it again and it appraised for $1,175,000. We're listing it for $999,900 because we're going to get a bunch of people to fight all over it and we're going to ring it up like crazy after the snow melts. But we're also making sure that it goes on the market as clean as a whistle as possible without any of those dings and so forth. So
I've got a question for both you guys about inspections. Do you ever have your seller do an inspection before they put it on the market?
yes.
How does that work? How does that tactic work?
Okay, so one of the things and here's why I like this. If anybody did relocation or has done relocation, you have to, okay? So years and years and years ago, when I did a ton of relocation, I loved it. I loved that relocation hired the inspector. that relocation told the seller, get this fixed, get this fixed, get this fixed. I loved that when I got that listing, that I knew everything that the inspector found. I knew everything that had been fixed, and I had receipts from licensed contractors with warranted work. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Those got to the closing table with a lot less issues than anything else. I loved it. I like to control a situation, you all. That's the real truth of the matter. I'm a control freak. And so if they agree to do that, I get to control 95% of everything that's going on. So that's the real truth. Now, some agents will say, absolutely not. You do not want this to happen. Okay, well, let me tell you this. About 18 years ago, I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, you all. So today, a $2 million house is expensive. Okay, 18 years ago, this house was $2,200,000. It was Drive It. Have y'all ever heard of Drive It? Horrendous. You don't put Drive It in humidity. This was a famous basketball player's house here in Louisville, Kentucky. I listed it. I got a contract on it. It went to inspection, and it had moisture everywhere. And in order for that house to be able to be sold, all that Drive It had to be ripped off. It was over a $500,000 deal. I didn't make any money on that house, you guys. I didn't pay for anything. It just never sold. I mean, it sat and it sat and it sat and it sat. It became a nightmare. So everybody has their own opinion. I'm a control freak. I want to handle everything from start to finish, unless it's something being sold as is, where is, and all that. I want to know. Alex?
We don't do it often. It's very rare in our market to see it. There's a couple of agents and that do it, but it's not something that we've ever really gotten into. And I think from a lot of us, from probably 2018 to the middle of 2022, really weren't doing a whole lot of inspection negotiations anyway. But I think it's something that, if all those things that Stephanie falls to from the standpoint of like, hey, sets you up for success with regards to this, this, and this, I think understanding who your seller is, what the demographic is it something, I see a comment here from Jennifer. They spend over $1,000 on inspections to deliver disclosures up front. I think, and it's, look, you look at it from this perspective. You spend $1,000 up front for this boatloads of education, and it costs you a fortune if you don't do it. I think the cost associated with it is something that we would struggle to get clients to do in our market, just because it's not as common here. But I understand why you do it for sure. Jennifer comments here. I usually give the seller 3 prices: as is price, cleaned up price, turnkey price. I actually love that. I think I do it from the standpoint of here's a range. Here's what this part of the range means. Here's what this part of the range means. And here's what this part of the range means. Pick your poison here, because look, everyone is different. And look, like I walked in, I just had a listing, and we sold it in a couple weeks. And when I went there, the conversation was, when I met with a previous agent, they told me to redo the kitchen and they told me to redo this. And I always say this, look, I'm not in the business of spending your money. If you'd like to do those things, I can show you what that all looks like. If you did the kitchen and you did this, here's what I would expect your price to list at was. I don't know what your cost of renovation is or who your contractor is associated with that, or are you asking me to general contract your property? Because I'm not that, but here's what we can do. Or if you sold it as is, here's what it looks like for this to be really, really easy. Here's this range, this range, this range. And I'll do that with folks often. But when I let them do that, the seller picks, we pick with the understanding of, hey, in the instance that it doesn't work, here's why it's not working. So it's a collective effort. I think one of the reasons I've had such a great deal of success on the listing side and with my business over the years is I had a conversation, and this was on the buy side of real estate, but it also is relative to the listing side. Years ago, I was really struggling with a property that a buyer of mine was purchasing. And I had a real estate coach at the time, and I asked him, I said, man, I don't want him to buy this house. I can't believe he's doing it. I feel like this is a foolish move. And he said, Alex, provide the facts and get out of the way. He's like, you're not spending the money. And I would say this to the seller as well. Like, oftentimes when the seller in that instance of Stephanie would drive it, you probably told him, you have to do this. Nobody's going to buy this house unless you do it. And they probably said, well, do you think somebody would do it for less? And is there a way you can sell it without it? And I bought it without it, and it wasn't a problem for me. And on and on and on it goes. But all you can do,
Bye.
provide the facts and get out of the way. And sometimes it's our job as sellers, as listing agents, to meet our sellers where they are. And look, like, I had one of the sellers recently selling a property that was really important to him, provided all the facts associated with it. She just needed somebody to listen. And everything she said wasn't necessarily the truth. It wasn't representative of what they were going to do. But sometimes you just got to listen and say, hey, look, this is why this is in your best interest. This is what we had talked about. I understand why you feel how you do because of what you shared with me. Please let me know what's important to you and if you want to move forward with this. And you can't care more than the seller. And what I've always learned is the person that cares the least in the transaction always wins. You sleep better at night. I used to sit and stare at my ceiling and wonder, how much commission am I about to get rid of to get this deal over the hump? I don't do that anymore. I don't ever give away any money ever, about 99% of the time, because this isn't my investment. And so if I can provide the facts and I can provide the education and I'm comfortable either way. Now, look, my team has 27 pendings on the board. I'm not sitting here going, oh my gosh, I need to do this to get a check across the table so I could pay my car bill. And I know there's people out there that feel that way. But the reality is when you're doing this, you can't close the deal for them. Your seller needs to want to get this over the hump. And it's your job as the agent to provide the facts to them. And if they don't want to do it, or they're not reasonable about how they're going to get there, and the motivation and the price don't line up, then oftentimes, like Stephanie says, you just need to walk. And that sucks and that's hard. But let me tell you what's hard, trying to go to sleep when you got a listing that doesn't sell. And on the first of the month, you get a text from a client that says, Alex, are you doing open house this weekend? What are you doing to sell my house? Have you called all the agents that have showed it? You said, what about this? I need this. I just made another payment. How are you doing? No, thank you. No, thank you.
Time is money, you all. Time is money. And, there's only so much time in the day. And I say this all the time to clients. I say it all the time to people in general. Time is money. And the one thing I've never been able to figure out is how to put more hours in the day. I've not mastered it. So therefore, I'm sorry, but you're monopolizing way too many hours in the day of mine. I gotta go. See ya. I mean, literally, you have to know when it's time to walk away, because dead weight, every ounce of energy they're pulling out of you is an ounce of energy you can't put towards something that will make you money. And I'm telling you right now, the day that a light bulb went off in my head, and this is many, many years ago, but it was many years into real estate, okay? It wasn't when I was brand new. It took years for me to learn this. But the minute I started saying no to people was the time that I started getting more clients. People respected me more when I stood my ground and had a backbone, right? And I started setting the rules. When I set the rules, I got more clients. So don't be scared.
I want to reiterate something else too. It is not the price today that you put a sign in the yard. It does not matter what you bought the house for. It doesn't. The comps of today, the market of today, whatever today's data says, we hear this all the time and we always do this. Well, this is what they paid, or this is what they're going to net, or they're going to lose money. Well, listen, if they bought in the front half of 2022, when the market was blazing out of control,
And rates were
Why?
low.
And rates were 3. It's not the same. And
Nope.
so just because you bought the house for this and the market says this is what it's worth today, and maybe you got to bring a check, sometimes the option is, I think it would be best for you either to keep your home or rent it. And if that doesn't work, well, look, you can't just say, well, I need to sell it for more because of this. That's just not how the market works. And I think it's important for us to understand, like, sometimes you need to go to your client and say, you're going to lose money. And when I started in the business in 2012 as a brand new agent, we worked in like there were short sales. They were a thing. And it was always like, hey, look, if you could bring some money right now, opposed to going the path of a short sale or get a loan from your parents or get some money on that route, then that is something I would do because you're going to lose money. Well, why am I losing money? Can't you sell my house for more? Here's what the market was when you bought it. Here's what the market is today. It is not the same. And if you're telling people when they're buying houses, if you hold the house for more than just a couple years and list it and sell it, you'll make money and you'll be fine. That is not true. And you should be educating people. We had a seller on our team at the end of last year that we had a hard time getting him over the hump, and the agent on our team had told them, do not call me you got to live in this house 4 to 5 years based on what you paid to make sure you net positive to get out of this. Well, they called in 18 months and said, hey, it's time to move. Well, they brought a check. And sometimes it's your job to say, these are the options. Sit on the market and collect dust, bring a check, or take it off the market and keep it or rent it. What would you like to do? You can't say no to all of them. If you say no to all of them, call somebody else. Anybody have any questions on here? And if you're wondering how Stephanie and I have gotten so confident to have these conversations, it's because there have been times you have them and you don't get a listing, and then they call you back after the fact. So you have to take the risk to stand your ground and hold the rope to go, look, your house isn't worth this. And look, they can go list with somebody else and maybe it sells. Then it's your job to look at why you told them the wrong price or why you gave them the wrong data.
And you know what, too, you all, it is okay to, again, I've been in the business 26 years, but, over the course of the last few weeks, even, I've had a few people reach out to me, past clients, okay, that I dealt with a while back. I remember their behavior, right? The key word, behavior. And they messaged me and said, we're thinking about selling our house this year. We're thinking about selling our property this year. And I replied and I said, okay, what do you think it's worth? And I let them tell it to me. And when it's ridiculous, there's this one guy in particular, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous what he responded. I said, you need to call somebody else. He can't stand it. He wants to talk to me so badly. But I'm, you've got to protect your time. You just have to protect your time. It's not about being cocky. It's not about, I just know that I need to protect my time with him, and he'll either come down to reality or he'll go drive somebody else nuts, and I'll get it the second time around. And that's okay.
That's right. This is some great stuff, guys.
So what do you, question to Alex and Stephanie? So what do you respond to the seller when it's like, hey, I'm motivated, but can you just test the market, and they usually go up like $10,000-$20,000 above the, the CMA.
I tell stories of proof as to what that does. So I would say something to the effect of, hey, look, we could do that, but we just had a seller, or I've had a client, or I know about this listing that did that. And what I don't want to have happen is have to, and I'll say something like this too. The old great Wayne Gretzky would say, you need to skate to where the puck is going, not to where the puck is. And so what happens is you start reducing your price into where you should have started, and you're already too late. And my real estate coach has sent me it's like a bell curve. It's a chart, and it shows here's where you should list it the first day on the market. Here's where you should list it the first week on the market. Here's where you go 2 weeks. And so it shows what the reductions look like and what the time on the market would show. Well, if on week 2 you're cutting it to where you should have started, you're already too late. And
Right.
so you're trying to cut it in and you're trying to become attractive. And look, we just did this with the listing. All the buyers that you then cut the price to are going, ah, man, look at all these zits on this house and look at all these pimples. This house has all these problems. And then the lower price buyer that you're now trying to attract to has a huge list to complain about because they're not competing against anybody else. And you just tell those stories. And look, guys, ultimately, this isn't your property. Provide the facts, get out of the way. If they want to try it, set them up for what the process is going to look like. If the motivation is high, then you should help them understand, look, the way to get the highest value for your home with the best terms and the greatest experience is to price it here. Here's a story I have. I have a story of somebody that tried to do this. Here's what happened. Which one do you want to do? And you got to make it easy for them.
Yeah, exactly. And you can show the data of somebody who did price it right and how many days it took versus the one that sat on it for a while.
Yeah, Kim had a real world example with my son here not long ago. He was wanting to price his house a little higher than everybody else. So she put him in the car and drove him around to all the houses in the neighborhood, the competition, and said, this is why we need to price it right. You need to sell it fast, right? Yes. Well, we need to price it below everybody else or you're just going to help them sell their house, right? So he priced it right, sold it immediately, and got it out. Now, some of the other homes in that neighborhood, the same neighborhood that my son went to see, were still on the market months later, called Kim to say, hey, can you sell my house? Because you sold that one so fast.
I think the other thing that's really easy to do, like Rob, you said Kim put the client in the car and it's easier because it's your son. But if you bring your laptop or your computer to your listing appointment and you're talking about pricing and you've earned the opportunity to do this, sometimes you could pull up those listings and you could show the client and click through the pictures and say, hey, look, I know that house sold for $600,000, but like, let's look at some of the finishes in that house. You see this house here? Is this nicer or is your kitchen nicer? Well, that one's definitely nicer. Let's go through the rest of these pics and see how we got there. That's why I'm priced here. And sometimes that process takes a little longer, but if you can get them in your office or in a professional setting to be able to share those things, boy, oh boy, will they talk themselves off that ledge sooner to go, you know what? Actually, you're right. I understand why you're there. No other agent's taken the time to show me these things.
That's right.
And all those listings that they were competing, they went down to our listing. So half those other listings were pricing right at the price that I suggest everybody. They would, I mean, they were like all have to reduce to the price to get it moving. And those people like, man, if that listing was listing at your price, I would have bought that listing. I'm like, I know. I'm in this 26 year. I know. That's awesome. Thank you, Alex and Stephanie for that. That's awesome.
Well, thanks, guys, for an amazing call. And we're looking forward to next week where we're going to be doing the buyer side of negotiations. That's going to be a whole nother conversation, but I'm looking forward to it because we need to start off 2025 with a bang. So our first one is in the books. If you want to see the recording of this call, this Zoom, go to whygrowglobal.com. It's going to be recorded there. So, hey, hope you guys have a great week and thanks for coming on.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
Everybody, great job,
Happy
Alex
New
and
Year,
Stephanie.
everyone.
Bye,
Thank
guys.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Thank you.